Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. And this week we have a double Torah portion, and we're going to take a look at a combined message within the two portions. The great 19th century Rabbi Kagan, also known as the Chafetz Chaim, lived at the same time as Karl Marx. Both were Jews, but whilst the former became a prolific scholar and one of the most renowned rabbis ever, the latter had himself, alas, baptized and later grew to loathe all religion in general. Religion is the masses, he argued. Is he right? Is religion really just a crutch to lean on? Is religion really more for the loser and the brainwashed? Why did he die? God. How does the seed grow into a tree? God. How does the snow fall? God. How did we come about? God. Who brought? Technical glitches today. Apologies for that. Just make sure we are properly operational. Forgive me. And then we will resume. At the same time as Marx and Rabbi Kagan, trains were revolutionizing the travel industry. The saintly rabbi once observed a peasant helping himself to some steel that was laid down for track. "What are you doing?" he asks. "Listen, Rabbi, steel is a valuable commodity, and I don't think anyone's going to miss this one piece." "But," countered the rabbi, "it's train track. It's needed." And the man counters, "Thousands of miles of steel track has been laid. This one piece of track won't make the difference." And we all appreciate the inherent absurdity in the naivete of the peasant. That's the problem, is it not? When you take religion out of the equation, then you're left with an insular society. Everybody does their own thing. Everyone expresses their own opinions. Everyone can harbor their own prejudices. And all during the while thinking what I do, what I say, what I feel is my business and doesn't affect anybody else. But the point is, to you, it might be a solitary piece of track. To you, it might just be, you might think what you do is your business. But the reality is, it's part of a longer track. It's part of a bigger picture. And when you think life is all about doing my own thing and what you do makes no difference to others, you risk derailing society in the process. You know, there's a poster that still hangs in my childhood bedroom, which depicts a little boy resting on his arms with a scowl on his face and the caption beneath, "I know I'm somebody because God don't make no junk." All too often, it has been demonstrated that much of the malevolence experienced in society is perpetuated on account of incredibly low self-esteem. "I'm nobody, I don't matter, what I do doesn't matter, nobody cares anyway," says the verse time and time and time again in this week's portion. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God. Even when it comes to the most obvious laws of not stealing, not kidnapping, not raping, not committing any hideous offenses, Each time it says, I am the Lord your God. Why? Because it's precisely the belief in God that forcefully counters that isolated mindset of thinking that I'm a nobody and nobody cares and I can do what I want and it's my society and it's a free for all and we just have situational ethics and a law that maintains some kind of constitution to make sure I behave myself for fear of punishment. No, you are a somebody because God put you here for a purpose and God don't make no junk and you matter and everything you do matters, not just to you, but to the world as a whole. And therefore, there are absolute values and absolute principles and absolute morals that are common to all of mankind, regardless of where and when and what and how. There were these two kids standing at a big bar mitzvah party next to this huge chocolate chip biscuit stall. And knowing the propensity of children, the host put up a sign, take only one biscuit. God is watching. At the next stall over, there's a giant lollipop stand. A kid is hovering about with one already in his hand, contemplating taking another. The other kid leans in and says, go on, take another. God is busy watching the chocolate chip biscuits. Is there an antidote for the problems that plague society today? How do we ensure that the children of this generation are going to grow up responsible citizens of the world when they are bombarded with all kinds of nonsensical and extreme distortions of absolute values on social media and what have you? How do we balance that self-centered attitude of the me generation? Is there a means of assuring that civilization will continue to follow the norms of justice and the socially acceptable rules that have become the pillars of a just social order? And the answer to these and other troubling questions facing the world today is found by first recognizing and accepting certain objective truths about ourselves and about our universe. And at the heart of the response and at the base of the solution lies the need for the firm belief in God. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God. So now, with that in mind, ask yourself the following question. When is the last time you actually mentioned God at your table? Seriously. Judaism, I'm sure. Israel, I have no doubt. Many of us talk about Jewish values or Israel commitment or other such like sentiments. But what are these things when divested of meaningful, spiritual, divine substance? In fact, some of us often feel apologetic, I don't know, for coming to shul, for loving Judaism, for talking to God, as though this is just some weird thing we do to keep our grandmother happy in our primitive cultural life. So many young people are made to feel today that the truly open-minded, intelligent person knows better than to embrace irrational faith. We leave the choice of God up to them, but that's a fundamental mistake. And the world today is bearing witness to that mistake. We are a society today that excels in academia and technology and medicine and science, but we are failing miserably when it comes to humanity. We're raising a generation of entitlement with flimsy moral values. You know, there was a rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Taub, who passed away a few years ago. He was known as the Kalavar Rebbe. What made him stand out from any other Hasidic Rebbe was the fact that he had long, flowing, beautiful white peyot, but no actual beard, no facial hair. And he never had any children. Both factors attributed to his being one of Mengele's experimental children in the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz, he was in Belsen, and he stared death many times in the face. There was many an occasion over his 96 years on this earth when he was asked to speak, and every time, without fail, he started his speech with reciting Shema Yisrael, the ultimate declaration of faith. It was peculiar, but no one ever questioned it. It was assumed to be his thing. Only a few years prior to his passing did he explain it was on the very day of liberation itself when the Germans were cleaning up. So many Jews were being rounded up, and it was inevitable that my time had come. So I looked up to the heavens and I said the Shema. Then I looked to God and I said, if you get me out of this, I will be sure to always share the power of the Shema with other people wherever I go. And so he did for the many years thereafter. So contrary to what Karl Marx has to say, we don't accept faith out of fear or insecurity or superstition or meekness. It comes from power, not weakness. It comes from strength, not meekness, resolve, not doubt. We yearn to live a life imbued with spirituality, not because we're stupid or scared, but because we are wise and deep. We want to experience the infinite grandeur of every moment. We want to live in a world where people truly value life and have a basic moral compass that defines how we're supposed to live that life. Shema Yisrael, where people can worship freely. Hashem Elokeinu, where revulsion is replaced with respect, fear is replaced with friendship, and darkness is replaced with light. Hashem Echad. We want to see life, we want to live life to the fullest. Thus says the verse time and again, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God. But then there's a flip side to this. Do you remember a couple of years ago when there was a talk of creating a football super league? It was at the time the one real chance that Spurs had to lift a cup. After all, the other 11 teams almost immediately pulled out. The whole idea went from breakaway from the Premier League to breakdown in 48 hours. There's nothing more humiliating than seeing a ship sink in its launch. You have to wonder. These were captains of industry, team chairmen who were touting this at the time, highly successful people who obviously had a general good sense of judgment. That's how they made their fortunes. But in this instance, they couldn't read the room. They didn't know how to put themselves in the shoes of the fans, who are the most important part of the whole sport. And that's why it fell apart so spectacularly fast. But you see, sometimes when you feel you're not getting enough of the status quo, you look to create a new reality. I need to go one better. I can't be part of the Premier League. I need to create a super league. And as much as that might appeal, it can also result in backlash and all sorts of consequences. Let's consider a command in the second of our Torah portions, right at the outset, telling us, you shall be holy. How do we achieve holiness? How do we aspire to such a lofty status? Some might presume it to mean that maybe if I shuckle and I rock and roll at a slower 90-degree angle during prayer while you do it at 180 degrees at extra fast, you must be holier than I am. If your payot are longer, your tzitzit dangle lower, or your yarmulke is bigger, you must be holier. We're all familiar with the tradition of selling one's chametz to a non-Jew, which allows the Jew to keep it in his possession, even if it's not kosher for Pesach, albeit locked away. Normally, after the holiday, the non-Jew sells the good bags. But the Jerusalem Post reported how members of a certain community, Mishkanot Yaakov, in the Ramat Shlomo neighborhood in Israel, were encouraged by their rabbi, go one step further. Rather than selling the chametz, give it into the hands of the non-Jew. Just give it to him, gift it to him, and they'll return it after the holiday. So they put all their products, including all the expensive alcoholic beverages, in a specially designated warehouse, handing the non-Jew the key, believing that such an act would be a higher degree of observing, not owning chametz. And after the transaction took place and shortly before Pesach began, the non-Jew arrived with his truck and loaded it up with what was now legally his. Of course, no one can object to his actions because that would then simply suggest the deal wasn't sincere, which would mean that the chametz would have belonged to the Jew over Pesach. But you have to wonder, if Jewish law says you merely need to sell your chametz to the non-Jew, and for the past several millennia, that's exactly what we did, and that was good enough. Why does one Jew or group of Jews suddenly decide they have to go one better? We have to join a super league of religiosity and actually put all the chametz in a specially designated place. How does that enhance their spiritual stature or make them holier? There was a time in the early 70s when Israeli currency had some biblical passage written on it, prompting a discussion between contemporary halachists about whether one was allowed to take such currency into the restroom. And I have to wonder what was in the mind of one who contemplates this. I mean, do people really see themselves as holier, loftier, super league, if you will, that they discuss such concerns? I mean, it would make great business for those who collect money sitting outside bathrooms in Bnei Brak. Any bills in your pocket? Rabbi so-and-so says you can't take them in with you. Let me save you from sin. Give them and put them in my cup. And then you have newspapers that Photoshop women out of their pictures. It is not, they insist, intended as discriminatory against women. It's simply for the benefit of their pious readers who are looking to inject their life with purity and holiness. And as such, don't want to clutter his mind with any pictures of women. Of course, the real problem is that now that the fellow will look upon every picture with suggestive empty spaces and let his imagination run wild about which woman might have been sitting there. You know what happens when you look to create new realities? The backlash from fans of those teams that were discussing a super league speaks for itself. But when you go back to the beginning of time when God told Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge, Adam decided to go one better. So when he gave the instruction over to his beloved Eve, he said to her, you're not even allowed to touch the tree. And the Medrash relates, the snake pushed her against the tree and said, look, see, you touched the tree, you survived. You can eat from the tree as well. It'll be okay. You'll survive that too. And that moment, of course, paved the way for all things negative as we know them in our world. Jewish law tells us that we're supposed to bow at the beginning and at the end of the Amidah as we do. Says the Talmud, and one who wants to bow after every blessing, let him be taught the appropriate places to bow. And the commentaries ask, what's the big deal? What's the problem? So let him bow after every blessing if he so wishes. And the answer is, all that will achieve is that he will then perceive himself holier than everyone else. In other words, That's not going to make you a better person. It's not going to make you a holier person. It's not going to make you a more righteous person. It's an undertaking that achieves little more than making you think that you are in some kind of super league. It's going to give you a false sense of holiness. As the codifiers explain, when you superimpose stringencies in areas where it is essentially unimportant to be stringent, then the lines between what is optional and what is obligatory will become blurred, and you won't care to then take even the real obligations seriously. And finally, in this regard, in the forests of Northern Europe and Asia, there lives a little animal called the ermine, known for his snow-white fur in winter, who instinctively knows to protect his white coat against anything that would soil it. Fur hunters take advantage of this unusual trait. They don't set a snare to catch him. They find his home, which is a cleft in a rock or tree, and they smear the entrance and interior with grime. And then the hunters set their dogs loose to find and chase the ermine. The frightened animal flees towards home, but doesn't enter because of the filth. Rather than soil his white coat, he's trapped by the dogs and captured whilst preserving his purity. For the ermine, purity is more precious than life. If your so-called purity becomes more precious to you than life, if your beyond the letter of the law approach comes at the expense of the spirit of the faith, if you think that somehow you are better, you're in a league of your own, then you're going to get trapped. It'll generate a backlash, and as Adam came to learn, it can prove disastrous. Be holy, says God, just as I am holy. Be holy, but not holier than thou. You're a Jew. You're in the Premier League. Don't try to create a new reality, some kind of super league. You've got 613 mitzvot to contend with. Call me when you've got all that right. You've got the do's and the don'ts. Now figure out how to balance that with what will nurture you and enable you to grow. And that's for each person individually to determine. And that indeed is what will make for a meaningful Jewish life. Along the way, just remember, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am the Lord your God. Enhance your spirituality, recognize your absolute values, and go on to live